Please be seated. The court is now back in session. The chamber will hand the floor to the defense teams. And first to the co-counsels for Nunchi to put questions to the civil party. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Civil Party. I have a few follow-up questions relating to your testimony this morning, but also your testimony on the 2nd of April this year. And I would like to start with reading a small passage from your testimony. That is at 11:21 on the 2nd of April, Mr. President. You testified the following, and I read, I was arrested because my elder daughter was in the unit and she ran away together with Im Yem, who testified before me. In fact, they stole sugar cane from the unit, and she was arrested and beaten, and she was forced to confess that I was a former lieutenant in Phnom Penh. And because she was inaudible, forced to confess so, and then I was arrested for that reason. End of quote. Do you remember Mr. Witness testifying this?
Yes, I recall that a statement.
I'm not sure if I fully understand what you were trying to say. You said that your daughter, who was, I believe, around 7 years old, was arrested for stealing something. And all of a sudden, it seems she was forced to confess that you were a lieutenant. Did she ever tell you this, or how did you come to know this?
I know about this because the Khmer Rouge militia beat me up. There were 4 or 5 of them. They were beating me up during the interrogation, and they told me that I should not hide anything from them, and I should tell them the truth, that they already knew through my daughter that I was a lieutenant in Phnom Penh. And I thought that how come my daughter told them about this? But on the other hand, I thought because she was young and she was forced to say so. And later on, when I asked my daughter about the matter, she said because she wanted to be free, then she just said what she was asked to say.
Did your daughter tell you why she told the militia that you were a lieutenant and not, for instance, a sergeant or a colonel or something else, or a soldier?
In fact, she told me she was threatened to say those words. The Khmer Rouge arrested her, and she evaded from her children's unit to go and steal sugarcane. And she was forced to say those words, that I was a lieutenant in Phnom Penh, and if she said such words, then she would be released. That's how she was threatened by Angka, and she was young and she wanted to be freed, so she said those words.
Do you know why it was that the people who interrogated you needed to have some form of confession of your 7-year-old daughter in order to be able to arrest you?
I do not know about that, as at the time I was at the Oxcart unit, and the reason for my arrest was because of what my daughter said about me.
But going back to my earlier question, did your daughter later say why she had told the militia that you were a lieutenant and not just a soldier, for instance?
I have just told you about that. My daughter told me that she was threatened to say that that her father was a lieutenant in Phnom Penh. She was threatened to say those words, and it does not mean that she wanted to say those words by herself. It was the words that she was ordered to say, and if she said those words, then she would be released and she could return to her children's unit.
Does that mean that the militia already suspected you to be a lieutenant and then asked for confirmation from your daughter?
No, they did not have any suspicion on me, because I told them that I was never a soldier. And the first reason was that my daughter was arrested from her children's unit. She was beaten and she was forced to say those words.
Mr. Silverparty, on a few occasions you have given testimony to the effect that the militia guards who brought you to Angrokar were carrying on them an AK-47. Can you tell us how you knew at the time that these guards were carrying a so-called AK-47?
When I was taken from Tropang Thum to Angroka market, say a militiaman, and I was not sure whether he was a village or commune militiaman, handed me over to Taru. And Taruh went into an office, and when he came out, he brought along with him that AK-47 rifle, and I saw it with my own eyes.
That's how I understood your testimony. My question, Mr. Civil Party, is how did you know at the time that the gun or the rifle that you saw was what is called an AK-47?
I did not know at the time that was either it was an AK-47 or AK-48 rifle, but because of the shape of the cartridge, then I recognized that it was an AK-47 rifle.
And would you be able to explain us how you could determine from the cartridge that the rifle was an AK-47? Where did you get that knowledge?
The AK-47 rifle had a cartridge in the shape of a curve, a rather curved shape. So I recognized that it was an AK-47, and in each cartridge there would be 30 bullets. In that magazine there would be 30 bullets, but at that time I didn't know how many bullets were loaded in that magazine.
Where did you get the knowledge of how many bullets would fit into the cartridge of an AK-47?
Because I used to see that kind of a rifle when I was in Phnom Penh, that is before the 17th April 1975. I saw those kinds of rifles in Phnom Penh, and I saw it also when I was at the old Back Om refugee camp, and there were soldiers there who carried the AK-47 rifles. So immediately upon seeing the rifle, I recognized it immediately that it was AK-47.
Mr. Witness, you've been asked by the investigators of the co-investigating judge, Mr. President, that is E319/12.3.8, question 6. Questions about the Vietnamese soldiers who were called the Mike Force, or quote unquote, tomorrow die, with the military insignia of a skull. Can you tell us how you knew about this unit called the Mike Force?
I stayed along the border and during the coup d'etat in 1970, when it was conducted by Tribunal to topple Sihanouk, the soldiers, the so-called Mike Force with the skull symbol came through the village to Tulpongro village. There were many of them, and that was the reason I knew about these Mike Force soldiers.
In that same statement to the investigators of the investigating judge, question 44, you testified that Khmer Krom people in Svevo village had a rank of an officer. I will read you the full question and the answer to be more precise. Question: when you were in Svevo village, did you know if there were people killed? Your answer: yes, there were. Khmer Krom people had a rank of an officer. In Svevo village, the Khmer Rouge propagandized that those who were officers during Lon Nol regime would be allowed to resume their positions in the army, and that they would be dispatched to fight the Yun. But in fact, they were all taken to be killed. I'm specifically asking you about this one little sentence at the beginning. Khmer Krom people had a rank of an officer. Can you tell the chamber how you knew this?
When we were evacuated to that area, and about 10 days after, the village chief, Tasom, convened a meeting and said that for anyone who held a position or rank in the army, for instance, they need to tell him the truth, and that they would be sent to their previous positions. And if they were a second lieutenant or a lieutenant or a captain or a teacher, then they would be sent back to their positions. For example, a teacher would be sent back to teach children, and for the ranked soldiers, they would be sent to the front battlefield to fight against the Vietnamese. And upon hearing that, and that was the trickery used by the Khmer Rouge, because in fact they wanted to know if anyone held any position or had any rank in the previous army, because they wanted to revenge those people.
I listened carefully to your answer, Mr. Witness, but I don't think I heard you explain to me why you thought or why you said it was that Khmer Krom people had a rank of an officer. I still don't understand why it was that you said this specific thing. Why did Khmer Krom people had a rank of an officer? What do you mean?
I knew it because the Khmer Krom people were told about it during a meeting, and since I was living with them, they told me that if Any of them were army officers in Kampong Sam or in other area. And through that, I learned about this information, and also through my observation, those people who told the Khmerus about their previous positions, they disappeared 2 or 3 days later, and I concluded that they were not taken anywhere but to be killed.
Let me now turn to the questioning of you at Angkor. You said that you were interrogated and that you were asked over and over whether you were or whether you had been in fact a lieutenant in the Lon Nol army. You told us that you said that you were not guilty. Do you remember whether the interrogators at one point accepted your statement? Did they believe you were in fact not a former Lon Nol officer?
It seems that they hesitated to make that decision. That's why they kept me. And if they took my words that I was a laborer and I earned a living by selling firewood, they would let me go, but because they were unsure, for that reason they kept me alive.
But how do you know that? Did they tell you that they believed you, or that they were hesitating? What is it that you can tell us from your memory?
I do not know whether they believed what I said. I cannot make that a conclusion. However, I was tortured in order to make that a confession.
How many times were you interrogated? Do you remember?
At the beginning, I was interrogated by the chief of the militia, and I was tortured during that interrogation, and that was the first time that I was interrogated. And when I was sent to be detained in the prison, I was interrogated again.
But do you remember what you told the militia to convince them that you were not a former Lon Nol officer?
The matter whether they believe that I was a lieutenant in the former Lon Nol regime or not, I could not make that a conclusion. The truth is that the 4 or 5 militiamen beat me up again and again, one after another. They forced me to say that I was a lieutenant in the former colonial regime, and if I were to say that, I would be released to return to my unit. But how could I say that? Because I was not a soldier in the former regime.
But would you be able to remember from the way you were interrogated whether your interrogators were in fact convinced that you had been an officer in the Lone Nol Army?
Nah.
I have told you already that I could not make a conclusion whether they believed what I told them or not. And I was beaten, I was tortured, and I was never a soldier. And I kept telling them that I was a laborer and that I earned a living by selling firewood. And in the end, I was put on a horse cart to go to be detained in the prison. President Council, please move on if you have other topics to cover, because it seems that you keep repeating the same questions on the same topic. If not, then the chamber will give the floor to another defense team.
The questions, Mr. President, go to whether Khmer Rouge cadres believed or not whether he was a Lone Nol officer, and then what the consequences would be. It goes to the heart of the allegation of the prosecution. So it might sound repetitive, but it's going directly to the core of the allegations of an existing policy to exterminate anybody with a rank. So I think I'm entitled to some leeway, even if it sounds repetitive. I'm just trying to find the truth here.
President, the chamber has heard enough on the topic that you put questions to the civil party, and if you don't have any other questions on other matters, then the chamber will give the floor to another defense team. And the civil party has responded clearly already to your question. And of course, you cannot force or try to repeat the question so that to elicit the answer you want from the civil party.
Fine, Mr. President, I'll move on. Mr. Civil Party, have you learned later, after 79, why you were sent to Angro Ka and not sent to Krang Tachan?
Answer. I couldn't know why. I simply could not know.
You've also spoken a few times briefly about prisoners possibly being taken to the Dam Rai Romil mountain. Can you explain to us why you thought that prisoners might have been taken to that specific location? Other than you already testified that you peeped through a hole. Can you be more specific why you thought they were brought to the Dam Rai Romil mountain?
Answer. I did not know why, as I told you. At Angroka, I was shackled, and I just looked through a crack in the wall, and I could not conclude from that they were being brought away to be executed at Plum Domrey Romil or anywhere else. I simply saw this happen, saw people being arrested, they were tied up, and they were being brought to Domrey Romil mountain. But I did not know where they were being brought to because I was shackled and I was lying on my back and I couldn't turn anywhere.
Do you know how far Angroka was situated from Dam Rai Romil mountain? How many kilometers was it between Angka prison and Dam Rai Romil mountain?
បាទអារឿងចម្ងាយប្រមាណគីឡូហ្នឹង
Answer. I cannot tell you. I would just see the mountain in the distance from Angroka, and maybe it is about 6 to 7 kilometers away.
Some additional questions on your fellow prisoners. If I understand your testimony correctly, you're saying that you don't know much about reasons for the arrest of your fellow prisoners. Did you never speak to each other about reasons of arrest, for instance, at night when you were shackled or during the day when you were working together?
Answer. No. I never spoke to them. I was afraid. It was forbidden to talk to other people under this regime, so we were afraid to talk. I knew a so-named Khan. He said that he was tending cows. He would bring them to outside. Apparently he threw something which on a veal, which explains why the veal broke its legs, and that's why he was brought away to be detained.
Let me ask it more concretely. Do you know of any fellow prisoners while you were there who had also been accused of being former Lon Nol officers or soldiers?
Answer. No. I spoke to no one, so I wasn't aware of all of this.
Another question. I heard you saying earlier this morning, Mr. Civil Party, something about a slogan that you had heard. Words to the effect that keeping you is no gain and losing you is no loss. Do you remember who exactly said this to you?
បាទ
Well, this slogan was said everywhere. I heard this slogan from the base people. For example, Chun Domain. They said no loss in, no profit in keeping and no loss in losing you. For example, they would pronounce the slogan with new prisoners and say that there was no gain in keeping them and no loss in losing them.
My question was, do you remember who exactly said this while you were in Angroka? I believe you put it in relation to your detention. Who was it specifically that said that to you?
Answer. It was Meng, the head of the detention center. He is the one who said that.
Have you ever heard this slogan being said on the radio?
Answer. Back then, I was living like in a hole. I was living in darkness. So I couldn't listen to the radio. So, of course, I never heard this slogan on the radio.
Have you ever heard of something called revolutionary flag?
Answer. Yes. I heard about this magazine, Revolutionary Flag.
Ever read one?
Answer. No. Never. I just heard people speak about this magazine.
Have you ever heard anybody say to you, people who read that magazine, whether they in fact read this slogan in the revolutionary flag, that keeping you is no gain, etc.? Do you know whether this slogan was ever used in the revolutionary flag?
Answer. I never read this magazine, so I simply heard about it, that's all.
My last question to you, Mr. Civil Party. Have you ever yourself been a member of the Mike Force?
Answer. I spoke to you about this already. The Mike Force fighters had a skull emblem on them, so they were called the Death is Tomorrow unit. These are people who came from Vietnam.
But were you a member of them, or were you ever associated with the Mike Force?
Answer: no, never. I simply saw Mike Force fighters, that's all.
No further questions, Mr. President.
The chamber will now give the floor to the Kyo Sompong defense. Counsel Kong Som-on, thank you, Mr. President. I have a few questions to put to the civil party. First of all, I would like to ask you questions with relation to document E3/5034, which is your civil party application. In this document, we can see the name Chao Ni mentioned. So I would like to know if you knew Chao Ni, or if you had known him before you filled out the victim's information form.
Bad.
Answer: I never knew him before. One day after the court was set up, Chao Ni came to see me at Im Yeng's place. She said that I had been tortured and detained, and then Chao Ni sent someone to take me to his house because I had been tortured and detained. So he asked me to draft my complaint, and he said that the court had been created, and it was he himself who came to tender my complaint instead of me, and I did not even know where these complaints were received. And so I formulated my complaint based on my own personal history, and he was in charge of bringing my complaint to the court. Counsel Kom Sam-on, thank you. So you wrote this complaint yourself, or did someone help you draft it? Answer: I wrote it myself. Without anyone helping me. But Chao Ni, however, knew where this complaint had to be brought to, and he took charge of tendering my complaint instead of me. And so, however, I wrote it all on my own, without anyone helping me. Question: so this means that in your application or in your victim's information form, everything that is written there was written by yourself. Is that true? Answer, yes, absolutely. Question, thank you. In document E 319/12.3.8, at question 92 and question 97 and 98, which is, did you fill out the form yourself? And you say no. You answer no. So, and the following question, your thumbprint is affixed on this form. Do you know who filled in this supplementary information form for you? And you answer, I neither filled in the supplementary information form by myself, nor remember who filled it in for me. But Chowni helped submit this form for me. Do you remember the kind of form this was? Answer. Well, it's been quite a while since there were indeed two forms. But when I answered no with regard to filling out the form, it is because I saw that one of the forms did not, my handwriting was not on one of those forms. And it was said that a certain number of Vietnamese had been brought away to be executed. That's why I said, no, that's not the form I filled out. That's the reason for all of this. Thank you. With regard again to the same document, at question 54, question and answer 54, Council, is this point 8 or point 18? It's point 8, Mr. President. So at answer 54, well, or at question 54 rather, it is stated the Khmer Rouge took Khmer Krom people who used to work for the London regime to be killed. Did they also take Khmer Krom who did not work for the London regime to be killed if they were identified as Khmer Krom? Answer. To my knowledge, they did not kill the Khmer Krom who did not work for the London regime. By the way, it was also hard to distinguish whether or not they were Khmer Krom. Question. I would like to seek some clarification from you. Do you know a Khmer Krom or Khmer Krom people who were not officers or who had worked for the London regime and who were brought away to be executed? Answer. During the meetings in the village chief did not know who was a Khmer Krom, or did not know if the people had a different origin. It was announced that former officials could get back to their jobs. It was then that the Khmer Krom said that they had been servicemen for Lon Nol who had arrived from Kompong Saum. And there were also other Khmer Krom who held no specific positions under the Lon Nol regime. But to be clear with you, no question was put with regard to the identification of the Khmer Krom. But to sum things up, to be clear with you, the Khmer Krom did have an accent. Question. Thank you, Mr. President. I have no further questions. Counsel, you have the floor. I have a very brief line of questions here regarding the answers that you provided to my colleague Victor Koppe with regard to your knowledge of weapons. I noted that not only you know how AK-47 magazines are configured, that is to say that they contain 30 bullets, but you were also able to describe the specificity of the design of the bullets that are used with these guns. You said that the magazines were curved, so I, of course, understand that you saw these guns when you were in Phnom Penh as a refugee, but I'm asking myself, how is it that you have such detailed knowledge of not only the content of the magazines, but also of the shape of the magazines of these guns? Can you explain this to us, please? Answer. Well, it is because I was at the refugee camp under the supervision of the army, and I saw the AK-47s and the M16s and the R-15s, because at the camp where I was, there were soldiers too. And so the soldiers showed to you their guns and explained to you how the guns worked, and they would also show you the magazines and the bullets, and they would explain to you how all of this worked. Is that your answer, sir? Answer. Well, I was with soldiers, so it was quite normal for them to tell me the names of these different rifles or guns. I had been a factory worker, and my job consisted in cutting wood, but back then the soldiers were there to defend the refugees, so then sometimes I asked them, well, what's the name of such and such a gun? Or that's why I got to know the names of these guns. The interpreter did not hear. Thank you, counsel. Mr. Tan Kim, the chamber thanks you for having testified here today. Your testimony contributes to the ascertainment of the truth, but your presence here is no longer necessary. You therefore can return home. I wish you bon voyage. Court officer, as well as Wesut, can you take the necessary measures for the witness to return home or to travel back to the place of his choice? And the chamber would also like to thank TPO that supported the civil party during his testimony. Mr. Tin Sarat, you are excused. Civil party, you are also excused. Please hold on for a few seconds, please. Because I mistook you for a witness, whereas you are a civil party. As you know, you can make a declaration of suffering linked to crimes that were committed and which led you to join as a civil party. So you can make your statement on the suffering you endured and you are entitled to do so at the end of your testimony. So please proceed.
Civil party. First of all, allow me to say thank you to your honors and Mr. President. I'd like to make my personal statement of suffering that I went through during the period of 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days. It was miserable for me to live through that regime. And the fact that I survived the regime means that I was reborn. I was forced to overwork and given only gruel to eat. I was beaten, I was tortured and imprisoned. Physically and mentally, I suffered. And I could not get help from anyone. I pray to the souls of my parents and my ancestors and the gods and the sacred objects to save me, to rescue me. And fortunately, I survived thanks to the 7 January victory. I survived because of that particular day. I lived through the most miserable period. My ankles were shackled. I lied down on the floor and I could not move. Some other prisoners only had one of their ankles shackled, but both of my ankles were shackled, and it was very difficult to relieve myself while I was detained there. And the container was a bit far for me to reach, and because both of my feet were shackled, it was very difficult to reach the container, and I had to ask an inmate there to move it, and then I had to maneuver myself so that I could put the container underneath me. It was the most miserable moment in my life, and I did not deserve that. I did not make any mistake, and why I received such an injustice during that regime. Since I was born, that was the first time that I went through such miserable period, that is from 1975 to 79. I was in a state of being alive but being dead at the same time. Although I survived, but physically I suffered, and my body is now weak. And I would like to appeal to the court to please assist me in finding me justice, or whether you can award me any financial gain. And of course, I appreciate and I would request for the collective reparation, and at the same time, I would seek a personal financial award for the damage that I suffered materially and physically during the regime. Since now physically I am weak and I cannot do a proper living, I can only engage in light work. And to your honors and to the councils, to the prosecutors, both national and international, I wish you all happiness, good health, and long life, and good strength, so that you can solve this matter, this issue for us, the victims, and that we would receive the justice in the end. Thank you, Mr. President. President, once again, thank you, Mr. Tan Kim. The Chairman would like to clearly confirm that you cannot claim or seek a personal award during these proceedings, and that is clearly stated in the internal rules of this court concerning reparation. You can only seek moral and collective reparation, and not a personal or financial or material award. And Mr. Tan Kim, you may now leave the court, as well as the TPO staff. President, it is now appropriate to take a short break. We take a break now and return at 3 o'clock. And when we return, The chamber will hear the testimony of a witness through TCW 809. The court is now in recess.
សូមចេញក្រោកឈរ